welcome everybody to our Thames event. This is the Thames Coromandel meeting. This is the last meeting we have on the iHemp tour in the North Island. So quite a monumentous occasion from that point of view, because it's been quite a big couple of months going around and bringing the word around industrial hemp to a whole lot of people at various town hall meetings and university meetings. I just want to acknowledge that we have some 9 participants online, so it's great to have you here, folks. I'm hoping that you'll be able to see and hear everything that's going on. I do have an apology because Bill was called to an organics meeting in Wellington, so we're going to play a presentation that he did from Tokeroa's meeting. And as you've just seen, we're going to work out how to get Nick to zoom in because he wasn't able to get across the Thames this afternoon. Before we get started, it's always nice to talk about a little bit about the history of industrial hemp, and especially from the New Zealand Hemp Industries Association's point of view. So this will just help you to understand some of the context of our discussion this evening. When we started in 1998, there was a moratorium from the government on talking about anything to do with cannabis. And so when we brought up the topic of industrial hemp being low THC industrial hemp, then they said, well, no, we can't talk about that because we've got a moratorium on cannabis. So we and a number of other people involved in the industry really got some momentum behind us and started to sort of lobby to get them to change their point of view on the moratorium. And that's why we produced the 5-minute guide on industrial hemp in 1998. And that was sent to all the MPs at the time. And that helped them to get over their fear of discussing cannabis, in particular low THC industrial hemp, which resulted in the trials that went on from 2000 to 2005. On this slide, we also are showing a snapshot of the investor report, and we're lucky enough to have Dr. Nick Marsh, who wrote the report, presenting this evening. And I just put that on there to show how far we've come in the sense of no industry, starting off as a cottage industry, really wanting to really develop the emerging industry, and now we're getting to the stage where we're talking in terms of decent economic outputs, environmental opportunities, and really it's come a long way in that 20 years. The investor report on the right was produced in 2021. So we are talking about the cannabis plant, but as I keep, and I will repeat saying it, we're the low THC industrial hemp varieties. As a genus, there's generally people consider the sativa indica rudularis as being the principal genus. As you can imagine, the long sativa for a fibre crop, the shorter indica for a seed and health crop. On the right, there's a picture of a cross-section of a stem, which shows the bast fibres on the outside, the primary and secondary bast fibres, and the inner woody pith. So if you can imagine, if we're taking a hemp stem and breaking it up, we've got those 3 sort of products, the 2 bast fibres and this inner woody pith that we call the hurd or the shiv. And that's the fibre varieties that we're looking at. For the food side, we've got the seeds coming from the plant. And from the NZHIA's point of view, we have 4 corners of the industry, which are the growers producing the plant, which underpin everything we do, and then the fibre, the food, and the health industry. So the food at the moment is mainly to do with hemp seeds, and they're very, very nutritious, of course, but there's also other industrial uses for the oil and other byproducts from the processing in the food industry that are available to make full plant utilisation a reality, and therefore be part of a real circular economy. As far as health goes, that particular corner was really talking about female plants and using the leaf and the flowering tops of those plants for the raw materials that would be the cannabinoids, terpenes and flavonoids in that particular industry. We'll talk in depth about those 4 pillars or those 4 corners in my presentation at the end of, towards the end of the meeting, and we'll be looking at the why of the industry for those 4 particular types of business opportunities. So back to a history, we're not going to go back sort of millennia. We could, of course, go back to the cradle of civilization, which would have been held up by hemp fabric and hemp fibre, and the nutritional food would have been grown for the use of the people at that time. But I don't need to go quite that far back to prove a point, and this point being the economic potential. And as you can see there, a sailing ship on the left, it's definitely, obviously full of canvas, which is a Dutch-derived term for cannabis. So those canvas Sails would have been made out of hemp. The cordage, as you can see on the photo on the right, which is a traditional use. A lot of people tell me when I talk about industrial hemp, they've heard about it as a rope and cordage material. So there's another great example. But also on board, they would have had their uniforms would have been made from hemp, their paper and their maps and their charts, the oil in their quills, the caulking to seal the boat. They would all had a hemp component. And many people don't understand that they also would have carried a barrel or two of seeds, and each sailor would have had a ration of seeds for emergency use. So if they did get stranded, they could grow a hemp crop and produce the cordage and fibres they needed to repair their boat so they could get underway. So it really does underpin not only the trade and all those products that I just mentioned, but actually the transport of those products as well. So it was an integral part of our trade in the past, and it was really an exciting time. So these are examples of hemp health products or medicinal products. You'll notice from the names, Park Davies, Eli Lilly, these are common pharmaceutical companies that still exist these days. And up until the early 1900s or late 1800s, they were in the top 4 of the top 10 medical preparations of American pharmacopoeia. So they were very popular and they were really widely used at the time. And again, history is showing us that we've got a relationship with this plant and we've been using it in many ways for a long time. It was really an exciting time to be around agricultural byproducts and things because they were being used as a feedstock for industry. George Washington Carver started a movement around Commergy, using a chemical reaction to use those byproducts into all these agricultural raw materials into all sorts of industrial purposes. And of course, the chap on the right, Henry Ford, that's him knocking a plastic car with a sledgehammer and it just simply bounces back. If you look online, you'll see a 1940s version of that. Now, Henry was also a soya farmer as well as a hemp farmer. But again, it speaks to the fact that he was using agricultural raw materials to make composites, in this case, car parts. And he was also famous for the quote, anything you can make out of hydrocarbons, you can make out of carbohydrates. So this was proof that you were doing that exactly what he was describing. The car would have been running if it was a diesel motor on vegetable oils. The panels would have been made out of agricultural raw materials. So it just speaks to the fact that we had it really quite underway in the up until the sort of 1920s and 30s. A real rate-defining moment for the hemp industry particularly was George W. Shipland's development of the decorticator, which is this mechanical process of splitting those hemp stems into their bast fibres and hurd. Now, this was equivalent of a cotton gin at the time because it revolutionised the ability to process large quantities of industrial hemp for fibre usage. And this was something that he developed and patented in 1919. He was presenting that all around the country to interested farmers that were commercialising the opportunities because they knew there was a market for these raw materials, particularly the fibre. And so it was an exciting time, and we got up until it was celebrated really in 1938, that middle panel there, the $1 billion crop. A Popular Mechanics article in 1938. So this was something that we were talking about, $1 billion opportunity back then. Now, that article is all about the celebration of George W. Shipland's decorticating machine and the ability of that machine to produce enough raw materials that could go into a large number of industries. And if you see a quote saying 25,000 uses of industrial hemp, well, their fibre uses, and this is the article where that quote came from, everything from dynamite to cellophane. So it was quite, a massive range of end users. The article on the left is a Bulletin 404 put out by the United States Department of Agriculture. And if you see a quote or a meme on Facebook saying hemp will produce 4 times as much pulp as an acre of trees over the same growing period, this is where that quote comes from as well. And of course, people were using a lot of hemp in their paper manufacture because it had that long, strong fibre, but also it was a renewable and annual crop. But again, at these times, there was all sorts of other things happening in the background. Fossil fuels were coming in. They were working out how to make paper out of wood, which was easier to chop down and grow crops. And then, of course, in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act came out. which, as you can imagine, the year before the Popular Mechanics magazine in 1938. Now, what this effectively did was mean that everybody that grew industrial hemp, they didn't realise what marijuana was, of course, but when they did, they were asked to become a producer of marijuana, even though they were growing industrial hemp, and that cost $1 a year, and they had to register every year. So eventually it just sort of petered the industry out. But also at that same time, Prohibition had just ended, so there was a lot of unemployed people involved in the industry of stopping alcohol prohibition. They pivoted into marijuana, and that's what led to reefer madness, which became quite a phenomenon in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And that resulted in all sorts of problems for the industry because, of course, now we didn't have access to industrial hemp because it had been misrepresented as marijuana, and in effect our industry had stopped. That said, though, it's okay to bring it back when you need it. So Hemp for Victory, which is a newsreel in America that came out in 1944. This was during the war when people were struggling to find enough cordage and fibre for their uniforms and their ropes, etc. And so a newsreel was produced, and this ran before every Saturday afternoon feature, before the movies, and it encouraged every patriotic farmer, American farmer, to grow 1 acre of hemp for the war effort. And the soldiers below are guarding those hemp seeds for that crop. Now, that's something that's quite well known on the internet. But a lot of people don't realise that Germany had the same issues with fibre supply, and they produced a primer on the right that asked every patriotic German farmer to grow hemp for the war effort as well. Interestingly enough, that picture on the top left of the primer shows a male and a female plant. So they used a little boy and a little girl to explain how to grow hemp and the need for the fibre from that hemp crop. All of those things after the war went back to reefer madness as well, of course. So ultimately the world turned into the United Nations, and they settled on the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1961. Now, the important thing for us as the hemp industry is to acknowledge that Article 28.2 of the Single Convention allows us to cultivate cannabis plant exclusively for industrial purposes, fibre and seed, or horticultural purposes. So that protects our industry, because the UN Narcotics, Single Convention on Narcotics Drugs, acknowledged with this Article 28.2 that there was a traditional use, there was a lot of countries involved in using industrial hemp for food, fibre and health reasons, because it was a single plant that can house, clothe and feed you. So they had to acknowledge that low THC industrial hemp used for industrial purposes or horticultural purpose were a valid industry for any country that wanted to continue in that space. This was a critical argument that we had when we got the government to lift the moratorium and allow the trials to begin in 2000. And the trials went on for 5 years. The reason for the trials mainly was around diversion or risk of diversion. We didn't have any crop losses, so they realised that no one's going to steal industrial hemp and try and pass it off as marijuana. So they came up with the regulations in 2006. And as you can see from the objective in Section 3, this is enabling legislation. So we were enabling our industry to cultivate and distribute industrial hemp under a licensing regime that ensures that other forms of cannabis are not cultivated and distributed under the guise of industrial hemp. So what that means in a sense is that all they were worried about is the other side of the industry, controlling the THC. So we have little or no THC, less than 0.35%. So we are able to grow industrial hemp under a license, under our industrial hemp regulations. And because there are regulations, they have to sit under an act, and we have to therefore sit under the Misuse of Drugs Act. But just to have a bit more of a look at some of the definitions in industrial hemp regulations, and apologies for the people here in the room because we've got the Zoom slide right up on our visual, but you people online are looking okay. But what this means is that hemp means cannabis plant, and industrial hemp on the right there shows us that is a plant that contains less than 0.35% THC or up to 0.5%, or seeds harvested from that plant. So we've got a definition of what industrial hemp is. There's no definition really in the Misuse of Drugs Act of what they're trying to control, but in our case, our regulations say that we can grow industrial hemp under a license issued under the regulations. And interestingly enough, when we look at hemp products, which are when the industrial hemp is being processed somewhat, they become a hemp product, and any product of a kind that is derived in whole or in part from industrial hemp and a hemp seed food product. So any product that is made from industrial hemp can be made into a hemp product. So you've got a lovely closed loop system there whereby the licenses are issued by the Ministry of Health to grow industrial hemp, and only industrial hemp can be made into hemp products. So it's a very tight set of regulations. It's pretty straightforward. We'll talk about some of the implications for farmers and licensees in the presentation after our presenters have done their thing. This is just a bit of a celebration of some of the companies involved when we were doing our work to try and raise that moratorium and get those trials going. There was companies like Midlands that started growing in that 2000 period as well. Others have joined the industry since then. Hemp Farm, and then later Kanapu, Hemp Connect, and the Brothers Green were all represented in the food industry mainly. Just another slide there, because we did have a look at Henry Ford's car, which was a little dated, so I thought we would have a look at the Lotus, which is also made of composite parts, including industrial hemp, and the Class C Mercedes. Now, the reason why there's not more hemp in those panels in the Class C and other cars, it's a supply-demand issue. So we don't have enough hemp in the world to supply some of those automotive users. So I just mention that because managing this scaling of the industry is going to be a very important part of our topic of conversation later on this evening. So also we've got an example of a house being built with hempcrete, and we've got some examples of blocks here this evening, and that house is being which is partially finished at the time, it's now completely finished. It was being built in Taranaki, and now we have a number of other houses being built in the South Island, particularly Queenstown. So that's just a quick overview and introduction of industrial hemp and how we got to where we are. I'm now going to change over to our next speaker, which is Dr. Nick Marsh, and ask Nick to talk to us about the investor report we mentioned in my presentation, and then we'll talk to Bill Quinn, who will use a pre-recorded message because Bill's unavailable this evening.
Thanks so much, and kia ora, everybody. My name's Nick Marsh, and I'm basically a specialist in strategic foresight. So what I do is I look 10 years into the future of any particular sector that the client organisation is in. As it happens, in terms of the primary sector, I've worked in wine over the years, different companies, wine, dairy, kiwi fruit, and more recently in forestry, as well as things like energy and other sectors. So my job is to be a little bit of a crystal ball, but with some analytics to look into the future. So I came across the hemp sector by accident, like many people do, meeting one of the pioneers of hemp in New Zealand. And then I was commissioned by NZHIA in 2020 to research the economic potential for New Zealand. Now, I think it's important just to make a comment or two about the people who get an interest in hemp come from quite different positions, and there may be people in the room like this. So, for example, a lot of people get involved and explore it because they've got particularly a pain problem or an anxiety problem, and they've heard that CBD, which is derived from the hemp flower, is really good for pain relief. Or they've heard that their kids who haven't been to school have got a lot of anxiety, and again, CBD is really good. But how do I get it? They want to know. You might be a farmer who's thinking about adding hemp as a cash crop to your sort of portfolio of crops. What returns can I make? Who do I talk to? How do I find out more? Or you might be an investor who's come across the hemp story. Should I invest in hemp startups? There's a number of these companies. They're looking for capital. Should I invest? How do I get the information? Or you might be somebody in local or regional government. Is hemp good for my region? Is this something that we as a region should be supporting for jobs and for economic growth? So people have different, come into hemp from different positions. Over the years, I have to say that the primary driver has often been the quest for the health benefits of hemp and the problems of getting access to those health benefits through various blockages that I guess Richard has alluded to. So in New Zealand, there is a lot of people involved, and particularly on the research side, in the fibre side of it that Richard's referred to. Probably the main companies that he's mentioned are seed oil companies, and seed oil contains omegas 3, 6, and 9, and quite uniquely with all the other sources of omegas, hemp seed oil is the best package. And if you go to your supermarket, you'll see hemp milk, which is made out of hemp seed oil. And if you look at hemp milk, the people who got involved in also seed oil, which is available from all those companies that Richard mentioned, the predominant thing that they're looking for from the seed oil is relief from joint pain, arthritis and joint pain. So that's probably the major part of the industry today. The third one is cannabinoids, which essentially are molecular substances extracted from the flowers of the hemp plant and the cannabis plant. And basically, there's extraordinary research now that keeps on going to find the links between different cannabinoids and different illnesses and ailments that people have. And again, the most famous cannabinoid is actually CBD, which we'll come back to. So Richard referred to this sort of problem. The problem that has beguiled the industry here and everywhere in the world is this confusion between hemp and marijuana, which is actually not about hemp and marijuana. It's about THC, high amounts of THC and low amounts of THC. 0.35 is designated as hemp, and plus 0.35 is designated as marijuana in very simple terms. And you may recall the referendum that was held here recently, which was quite a close referendum around legalizing marijuana, i.e. THC. Interesting enough, today, you'd be amazed, really. America is a pretty conservative country. 19 states in America, including some of the more conservative ones, have actually legalized THC in their state. 19 out of the 50 states, which is quite amazing to me, given how, as we know, they're quite conservative politically. Anyway, leaving that aside. So what we did for our study was to say, look, let's think of hemp just as another plant-based industry, rather than sort of being obsessed with hemp is unique. Hemp is just another plant-based industry. And the two most interesting ones to me that we can compare it, potential of it, is wine and kiwi fruit, both of which I'm sure a lot of you in the room know a lot about. But what's interesting to me is their success story. They've had some ups and downs, but their success story is quite amazing and brilliant for our New Zealand economy, because both of them export about 90% of their turnover. And if you look at wine, their turnover is 2.5 billion or so. Kiwi fruit, 4.5 billion. So that is a massive growth out of two plants, one grapes and one kiwi fruit, job creation, and the export revenues that they produce. We believe, well, not just we believe, as I'll explain in a moment. It's pretty obvious that actually hemp could actually outdo those. It certainly could get up to those levels if certain things happened, which I'll explain. So why is hemp taking off in the world? It's really around the continued growth of interest in healthy lifestyle. And the healthy lifestyle ranges from, I can have a house that's more healthy, more sustainable, better to live in, out of using hemp fiber. I already mentioned the joint pain side of it. Even amazingly enough, the pet business, the hemp pet food business is enormous in America. It's banned here. You're not allowed to feed animals with certain parts of the hemp plant. In America, the dog industry is enormous in terms of CBD because it calms dogs, and there's so many people have dogs that are left at home all day and all sort of stuff. But healthy lifestyle is really what drives the interest in hemp, from people who have chronic pain right through to people who want to have the maximum chance of health and fitness. So two things I want to just draw your attention to now. This diagram here, all I'm saying here is that this is the current basis of understanding, research understanding, cause and effect relationships between probably around 40 of the cannabinoid extracts that have been identified from hemp, from the flower. Okay. Now, we're not talking about anything to do with THC at all. We're talking about cannabinoids, and essentially the research just continues. A lot of the research has been driven in the last 20 years out of Israel, interesting enough, which is now one of the leading cannabinoid countries in the world. So cannabinoids is what's going on. Now you'll say, well, what's medicinal cannabis then? Well, medicinal cannabis is about cannabinoids. And that was created under intense pressure from actually one particular mother who wanted to be able to get CBD for her son who had a major medical problem, and it was illegal here to do that. And she drove this and drove this and drove it, and eventually the government decided that they really had to investigate having a medicinal cannabis industry, because there was so much knowledge about the benefit of some of these cannabinoids. So that's how we've got a medicinal cannabis industry. Just the slight problem is that it's restricted to doctors' prescriptions. In other words, the view that these cannabinoids, or certainly CBD, is actually a medicine, not a nutraceutical. We'll come back to that point. This one here is another really, really lovely diagram. All I'm trying to say is there's another thing in the hemp flower, which is called terpenes. And I can just explain it in a simple terms by, if you look at if you ever buy a bottle of wine and look on the back, you'll find that it will probably say it's got hints of different fruits in it. You think, well, how can that be? It's a grape, isn't it? Well, these are like terpenes that are in the flower of hemp. So these here, I was in Noosa the other week, and there's a hemp shop on the main street there in Noosa, and they have a whole range of terpene-based nutraceuticals, which are completely legal in there, as they would be here, for all sorts of things like better sleep and so on. So terpenes is also another interesting part of this amazing, just the flower of the plant as opposed to the seed. Richard mentioned the growth of these startup companies that have really driven the essentially really the hemp seed industry, because that's what we've mainly got here, from the lady who makes power cookies for athletes, through to the two ladies that run New Zealand Hemp Press, who are very, very innovative, very dedicated to the health of women in particular, and children. The Canapoo gentleman in Napier, again, very innovative around hemp seed oil and cuisine, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff happening. And if you just go online, you'll find a lot of online distributors of hemp seed products of various sorts. So let's come back to CBD and nutraceuticals. So a nutraceutical is something which, in fact, I'll just go to the slide here. A nutraceutical is something that is plant-based that is good for you, okay? And all you have to do is to go into Health 2000, any shop of Health 2000 or any health food shop, and you'll see a range, the shelves stocked with usually pills, sometimes potions, which are plant-based, and they're good for you in various ways. So those are perfectly legal. And essentially, that is, if you go to the New Zealand Health Foods Association, you'll find that it's a $1.8 billion industry about 160 companies in New Zealand making this. And obviously that goes right through to the honey people. Comvita, probably the famous company in that area. Blackberry. I mean, all sorts of extracts from all sorts of fruits and vegetables. So prescription medicine, obviously, is on the right-hand side, which is what is just really getting underway in New Zealand. A number of companies that have been set up to pursue the creation of hemp-based or cannabis-based cannabinoid medicines, which unfortunately is a massive restriction on the much larger potential of nutraceuticals. And obviously over to the left there, you've got functional foods. You can already get hemp flour, hemp snacks, hemp protein powder, hemp milk, and so on. So that's really one of the pinch points that needs to be resolved both here and in Australia. So I'll just go back to this. Now, the fascinating thing about CBD is that I was in Hawaii when we started doing this research, and I was amazed to find these nutraceutical products all over, even in the supermarkets, arrays of these products, which are primarily CBD products of various sorts. And it was essentially that was in 2019 or 2020, that's $1.2 billion US in the North American market then, and it's been growing at something like 15-20% a year. So this is a very big market for just one cannabinoid. Why? Because it's a remarkable molecular product that this is the split of why people buy it. Anxiety and stress, 33% people buy it for that, 41% for pain, 9% for other medical things, and 18% for general wellness. Now, if just before this presentation, I went to remind myself, all of this is illegal in New Zealand, except if you can get a doctor to prescribe CBD for you with a prescription, okay? In London, where I will be in about 3 weeks' time, I can go into a major sort of department store, which is called Boots, which used to be called Boots the Chemist. And as of today, I can buy 80 different products with CBD in them, 80 over the counter. And in New Zealand, I can't buy any over the counter. So why? Well, ironically enough, in England, the reason is because until recently, England was in the EU, and the EU passed a law that allowed the novel products law that allowed these products to be made available. And we haven't got a novel products law here, so we haven't got them. So it's quite interesting that you can, there are various places in the world, most of the states in America, you can buy these products quite freely, and they're fine and they work, and you can get pain relief, etc. Here, you've got to go through a doctor. And unfortunately, very few doctors feel comfortable or confident in their knowledge about this particular science. So, yeah. So again, I checked in with the lady that ran that store in Noosa, and she said, well, basically the law and the setup in Australia and New Zealand is very similar. So they had a doctor coming in 1 day a week who was trained in prescribing nutraceuticals from hemp, and he basically could prescribe it on the basis that one of 20 different sort of ailments that the person had. But it's very difficult. It's very, very difficult to do something which a lot of the other places in the world is just simply in the local shop. So what we did then was to come up with two scenarios here, and what we felt was, if we didn't change these laws, or shall we say reform these laws around the nutraceuticals and versus the medicinal, we've got seeds, which is probably, well, it's nowhere near, it's nothing like that, but it might be 5 or 6 million. I don't know what it is today. Fiber has huge potential, but it's still at an early stage and requires a lot of capital in New Zealand. But we thought if all that capital flowed, etc., we could maybe in 10 years' time, we could maybe have a $500 million industry. Exporting is key to investment, and that might be tricky because there's a lot of hemp seed oil in the world. We have to differentiate ours as being special because obviously it would be more expensive than everybody else's. But the nutraceuticals could be 1.5 billion. You might say, well, if they can buy them in America or England anyway, what would be? Well, tell that to the wine people. There shouldn't have been a wine industry in New Zealand, folks. It shouldn't have worked. Why did it work? Because of entrepreneurial smarts around differentiating and making our New Zealand product special and getting people to pay a hell of a lot more for the product, for the red wine, the white wine, the Pinot Noir, the Sauv Blanc, etc., than equivalent other products from France or Australia. And that's called marketing, and it's called the New Zealand brand, which is immensely valuable to anything in the way of food and drink that you, perhaps as a discerning consumer, you may buy in your Waitrose or your more upmarket stores. So that's what we're sitting on. Incredibly exciting. As we said here in our title, just give us the nod. Just to give us the nod, a little bit of reform of these very old-fashioned regulatory block around nutraceuticals. It's not just us talking about it. The health foods industry has a bill which has been waiting for 10 years to pass around opening up more potential for nutraceuticals in general. But we would be, as the hemp part of it, we could be a very significant part of that growth. So I think that's probably just by way of intro. I don't even know how long I've been going, but essentially, just as a tip, NZHIA is fantastic, and the knowledge that the board members have there and the members of the companies. Look out for who are the local hemp companies near you. Go and talk to them, because the people who are running those companies have the passion and the knowledge for understanding hemp and the sort of the pioneering passion to keep the industry growing. And always give Richard, of course. You've seen Richard. Richard is, I would say, unquestionably knows more about the subject in New Zealand than anyone else I've ever met. So all I can do is hopefully there's a few useful things in there, and wish you all the best in your quest for hemp.
Well done, Nick. Thank you very much. It's great stuff, and thank you for the kind words, of course, but I really appreciate the point about the New Zealand brand, which will bring us nicely on to our next speaker.
A little bit of background to where I come from. I've been involved in the organic industry since 1985 or thereabouts, in agriculture and agricultural politics all my life. My introduction into the hemp side of things was from an organic dairy farming perspective, where we were growing the organic dairy sector in New Zealand, and we were worried about the food source to replace palm kernel, etc., and we needed a high protein filler that could bulk out grains, etc. The ideal thing is hemp seed cake. The only problem is we're not allowed to feed it to animals. But by the time I'd made the general inquiries, I'd been drawn into the network of the hemp industry. And so then Dave Jordan, Hemp Farm New Zealand, some of the other processors, medical and industrial, were seeking organic land, clean land, to grow the crops on, because it's an accumulator crop. And so we started finding pieces of land that were perceived as clean, being certified organic or not organic, but could be organic, not having had herbicides, fungicides for quite a number of years. And so that's where I got dragged in. We grew some up the dead end of Tapawahini Road in Tamanui on some fairly marginal harvesting country for a combine, especially the combine we had, which was an old rickety thing because it was the development phase. We did 33 acres up the top of the Kaimais. And again, some issues up there with having to develop some strategies. And I fully respect, James, what you're talking about with the clogging. We had a little short guy that spent more time up inside the combine unravelling. And then you look at some of the Canadian and international experience and some of the innovative ways that they've removed those obstacles in the crop. And just a fun fact, the research shows in New Zealand that the hemp we grow in New Zealand is 25% stronger than the next strongest natural fibre. And that is amazing. 25% stronger. But we can also put it through a 3D printer. So we've got products that we can develop and put through a 3D printer and take those properties forward. So that's where my involvement first came in, and then we grew from there to finding and assisting companies like Hemp Farm New Zealand with bigger contracts, Landcorp, for instance, Pāmu Farms, finding land and helping negotiate the deals with them for growing, working with guys in the Manawatu, speaking to farmers down there about some of the technologies, whether they were organic or not. One of the things we do find is that there's a resistance to a lot of these opportunities and the differences in production. And so in the Wairarapa, the hemp industry was showing great potential for the simple reason that they weren't allowed to grow peas. They're croppers, they've got all the infrastructure, but because of the pea weevil, they weren't allowed to grow peas for a set number of years. And so that was a great opportunity to go in with people with machinery, the right size tractors, cultivation gear, the knowledge, the hop on a tractor and know what they're doing to get the seed bed that you're referring to. So those sorts of things have had me in and out of the industry for many years. More recently, I've been doing a bit of work with hemp seed cake, and I'll talk about that as we work through the slides. So opportunities and difference in production and marketing of iHemp. And up there, you can see some tall hemp at the base, and then hemp seed, hemp oil, and the hemp seed cake. So that photo there just gives you an idea. That's a slightly before maturity. You can see the fence there. That isn't a dwarf fence. That is a standard fence. And it was very easy to get lost in that crop. And, of course, when you've got a crop that high, and with that long a fibre, once you start winding around, something going round and round on a combine, you end up with a piece of rope fairly soon. And it gets in behind the bearing houses. And so you've got to start looking at those things and saying, old trend machinery. And this is one of the big opportunities that we've got to look at, is what suits the harvesting? What innovations do we have to bring into the harvesting? Do we look overseas to some of the innovation there? Dave Jordan ended up bringing in a machine in from Russia. Now, that was a bit of a mission in itself, and it never really served the purpose here, but it was part of that journey of innovation. And this is a big bit of what we've got to actually think about and look at in this forward progress. The technologies. Mention's been made of the bird problem. Man, you should have seen the birds in this crop. Once the birds get a taste for it, they've got a taste for it, and they'll come back and back and back. And we do have answers for that. There's two simple ones that we can use in the industry, but a lot of people in the industry are stuck in traditional. And so laser beams are something that's been mastered for a lot of, the crops where you can set lasers and they will upset. But there's an even easier one, which is a proven spray. BD Max put it out. It's been through the horticultural trials and is used in the grape industry. It's used in stadiums to scare birds away from that specific area. It doesn't kill them, it just deters them. The only problem is most of the producers don't want to spend $1 until they have to, until the need is there. Most of the good preventative stuff, you've got to start before you need it. You've got to start before they get a taste. It's very hard to stop the birds once they know that that is good tucker, seriously good tucker. And this is some of the stuff that we've got to learn and take those early steps. Okay, the range of products that we look at, and this is part of the opportunity of that we've got to look at. Where are we going? What's our destination? And if we don't know what our destination is, we're going to have a real problem in designing what we're going to do. Am I growing to sell at the farmer's market, or am I going to be part of a bigger operation? Am I going to be a part of a cooperative, or am I going to look after me? I'm going to press it, I'm going to get every last dollar, and everyone else in the industry is my competition. This is part of the opportunity we've got to look at. And we've got to say, how is the industry going to best go forward and best serve the majority of the people? There's always room for people to be in their own space and do their own thing and their own branding and all the rest. But as James pointed out, he's already busy enough being a farmer. Marketing is a specialist job. Marketing is where you make or break a business. Growing stuff, that's easy. I was organic market gardening. I've lectured in organic market gardening and market gardening per se. Knowing your market. It is no good growing a 5 kilo pumpkin for the granny flats. They only want a little half kilo job. It's no good growing a particular kumara for Rotorua because they're very fussy. It's no good growing a hemp crop that doesn't meet the process of the harvesting, those aspects, or your destination. So before you start, think very much who are your partners and what's your destination. If your destination is doing hemp hearts and hemp proteins and other protein mix there, 2 sorts of proteins and some oils and bits and pieces, that's a lot of marketing. You've got lots of products, you've got lots of infrastructure, you've got stock take. Be very aware of that. Okay, branding and marketing. Boy, marketing. Whew. I've worked with companies that in the international thing, we were 2 years away with a milk powder from getting the product to market. They handed me the tin one day and I thought, holy hell, they've already cracked it. No, these were marketing gurus. They were wrapped with the tin. I couldn't believe it. I'm interested in what's in the tin because I'm interested in food. They were interested in the presentation. It didn't matter a shit about the food, what was in the tin. Take a look next time you go through the supermarket at the branding. And this is something the organic sector, the hemp sector really needs, and the organic sector really need to look at, is this branding, the image, the connotations, what we're doing, and how we market collectively the good story. And this is an opportunity, and it doesn't just involve farmers. It involves the marketers, the people that can challenge. This is part of the image. This is a real neat place, Nimbin, in the hinterland in from Byron Bay. Okay, it's Hippieville, man. It is Hippieville. Okay, they still have drug street fights regularly there. It is somewhere to go for an experience. But as the sign says, Nimbin, Hemp Embassy, we're not criminals. Well, most of them in town probably are. But that is an image that the hemp industry, the industrial hemp industry, has to fight. And that's something that Richard touched on before, that we've got to be very aware of that aspect of industry connotation. Where do you fit? We still get the standing jokes, wacky backy, and all these sorts of things. We've got to be very clear on that presentation of an industry. This hemp cake that we've got on your tables, you're not going to get high on it, guys. It's food. So let's be very clear on that. And we've got to present that. And this is part of the opportunity or the challenge of marketing, because we don't have to create that image. That is the image. We have to change that image. And this is something the organic industry has been struggling with for a long time, because we've got a lot of people in the organic sector that still want it to be cottage industry, still want it to be, a few marks on it don't matter. That's the proof mark that it's organic. But at the same time, we've got the guys that are doing excellent jobs at large scale. But a whole lot of people in the leadership want it to remain in a cottage industry. And that's a very big challenge. And that's something the hemp industry has to really look at. Are we going to be a whole lot of little people doing little things going nowhere? And once I collapse, the industry collapses, or are we going to get together and drive something forward? So be aware of some of those issues. Okay, this one's the three main food products. And as I said, my main interest, I've got people I talk to that are involved in the flower sector and things, and they keep asking me questions. I only got one question. Can you eat it? If I can't eat it, I'm not interested. I'm a grower of food. And I think I could say I know, because it's pretty common knowledge, that over the next 2 years, the world has a pretty big problem with food security. And so the food we have, we've got to utilise and we've got to make the most of. And this is a huge opportunity if we're doing the job right. We don't want to just do food, we need to do it right. Okay, again, looking at the product range there, we can do a whole lot of little bits, we can package up, we can go for high value, individual high value. The balance of high value, and I do this a fair bit when I'm talking to groups, and it's balance. High value most often represents low volume. Over the past 6 months, I've got rid of 100 tonne of hemp cake, hemp seed cake. It was going to landfill. I've put it into productive use. That is a waste of 100 tonne of food resource, of high value resource. So we'll have a look at that a bit later on. Okay, this stuff here, this is interesting. And can I go back? I can't go back? I can. So this stuff, yeah, but I'm not looking at that too. Trying to keep them both, So this stuff is interesting because that's a pelletized what? Now there's a market, there's a very good international market for the leaf, for the fines in the harvesting process. And so the harvesting that we did down in Fielding was really interesting because the guy's a cocky. He's involved in the grain industry, a couple of 1,000 acres. And the harvester, we had a few problems with the brand new harvester, but on behind it, we had a trolley, a old potato bin carrier, and we had a conveyor belt set up to catch all the leaves and the fines as they came out the back of the chute and put them into bins and take them away and dry them. That's the product there, light and fluffy. And even putting it in something like a wool press still wouldn't make it really viable to freight it. I'm sorry, Auckland, I've just gone backwards. So I hope you can keep up with that. So by condensing it into a very compact pallet, it meant it was going to be viable to ship to the UK to a purchaser who wanted it. Now, part of the legislation stuff says, no, you can't do that because you're shipping a leaf that's high in certain aspects. And so that project never went anywhere. But the opportunity was still that we were able to show we could pelletize it to really condense it so that you have got a bushel weight ratio that is transportable. Because otherwise you're going to take up a ship with very little load and there's no economy in that. So these are the sorts of destination things that we've got to look at. Also, that's got the potential to be a very good animal feed, but we're not allowed to feed it to animals. And so that becomes a real issue. So that's the fibre and that, or some of the lights, and that can be used for multiple things. We've got the hemp board, and this is from Nimbin. They've got quite a good display there. If you do get a chance, it's a great place to go to find out a lot of the history of a broad spectrum of the uses and applications of industrial hemp, medical hemp, and recreational hemp. So we've got those three categories. They cover all three. I think the bulk one would be the R, the middle one would be the M, and the lightest use one would be the industrial. But they do have it all there. And that board's got great potential in the building industry to replace particle board particularly, but any number of uses. Okay, so one of the big questions we've got to look at in the New Zealand scenario, and this know your destination, is are we looking at volume versus value? So if we take a look there, we can see, or we can't see very clearly, but Canada's got 137,000 acres of hemp, industrial hemp. We're at about 800 at the moment. Okay. Do we want to be in a scrap on bulk commodity? And this is something we've got to think about right early in the piece. They're growing it in a grain growing zone where it's hot and dry and arid. So they don't have the weed problems of the South Waikato. We've got to think about some of those things and how we compete and what is the difference in the product that we are taking forward. If we don't understand what the competition is, we're going to get sunk. We've got to know that before we start, not go into the scrap with them because they'll always be cheaper than us. The industrial model will always be cheaper. No different to some of you involved in the dairy industry here. We're industrial dairy. We can land dairy cheaper anywhere in the world than anywhere in the world can produce it there. These guys are industrial croppers. They can land hemp or canola or wheat or barley anywhere in the world cheaper than we can grow it here. We've got to be aware of that. So we've got to decide, are we in the volume game or the value game? And that's something this country has to decide. We look at things like Fit for the Future program, which we'll look at in a minute. New Zealand's agricultural push forward. That's really interesting because we're still talking about 2% growth. The dairy industry went through a period where we were 4% growth in volume, not in value, in volume. Well, didn't work. We're paying the price for it still. We can break down the individual countries. You can't see it very well there, but the top one's France, and we go right down to, we're sitting down about the same as, I think it was Latvia. But hopefully you can, if this is available, certainly the website's there. You can go in and get this information off the website. So I apologise about those two graphics. Okay, traceability, that's bankable. That's what I'm interested in. That's what I've been interested in since 1985, when I've been involved in agriculture for particular reasons. We went organic, and it's traceability that's bankable. And this is becoming a real challenge. So normally this one dribbles down if it's a proper PowerPoint, but it's not doing it today. Certified organic carbon farming for decades. Now that's been a growing market internationally for the last 3 decades, and it's not slowing down. Okay, it is independently third-party certified, so you have integrity. It is very clear about the rules and it's understood. It's high value. Internationally, Europe and America are legislating, putting in programs to encourage farmers. The USA's just allocated $330 million to assist farmers go organic. They've set targets in their agricultural policy for organic growth because they are looking at the future. Some of that stuff is tied to health because that's the only justifiable budgetary reason a government can go down that path. The health budget is crippling the world's economies. But what we've got to look at is the piggybackers. So we've got beyond organics with an X there on the left. They can still use synthetic chemicals and use urea and DAP and all sorts. They're beyond organic. Well, how? They're not even organic. But that's a marketing thing that people are using. Another beyond organics. And that's a New Zealand company, and that was for products that they couldn't get organic certification on. But the marketing is beyond organic. Then we've got the ones that didn't even get started, Eco 98, the classic quote out of Eco 98. We don't have to change anything we're doing. We just have to tell the story better. I'd rather we told a better story. I'd rather we added the value that we sold to the top value markets in the world, not the commodity markets, even in the dairy industry. So we look at some of the certifications and marketing that we've currently got. You want to buy some good feed? It was growing at 143 kilos a day, dry matter a day, when it was, cranking along there. Yep, Roundup sprayed, glyphosate sprayed. Now, where does that fit into the system? Well, we can market it as conventional, definitely. We can market it as RegenAg. We can't market it as organic. Perception is reality in the marketplace. And that's a quote from Peter Cullinane, who set up Lewis Road. He was Saatchi & Saatchi CEO worldwide. Okay, he knows his stuff. Perception is reality in the marketplace. This is the first time I've shown these slides because I don't want them getting in the hands, arguably, of some particular groups in New Zealand that want to shut down agriculture, livestock systems. But we've got to actually grip reality going forward. We are feeding Roundup sprayed pastures to stock and in the system. And we are now marketing and advocating that. This is glyphosate sprayed pasture cultivation for crop, spray-free. Yes, it can be certified spray-free. We are currently harvesting crops in the South Island that are certified and marketed as spray-free because they use a herbicide instead of cultivation, or as well as cultivation, as in this case. But it's spray-free because once it germinates, we don't spray it. Now, that's a perception thing. Spray-free, is that spray-free or isn't it spray-free? Because the consumer thinks that spray-free means you didn't use any of these things. So be very aware of some of these marketing ploys. What do we got here? Oh, dairy cows in milk, in milk grazing, glyphosate. Is it okay conventional? Yes. Is it okay certified pasture fed? Yes. Is it okay RegenAg? Yes. Is it organic? No. And perception is reality in the marketplace. That particular photo is taken on State Highway 2 in the middle of the Hauraki Plains, where we have all the tourists coming from Auckland Airport down to the tourist spots. Okay, Christmas lamb, anyone? The ewes grazing in a Roundup sprayed paddock with suckling lambs. Where are those lambs going to be? Somebody's Christmas dinner. This is value and volume discussion. This is something we've got to really get a grip with. Is it conventional? Yes. Is it RegenAg? Yes. Is it okay as pasture fed? Yes. Is it organic? No. Okay, so why are we hitting this? Because marketing, telling the better story, is something that we're now doing a hell of a lot of. And this is a program that now has 8,000 farmers signed up to it to market New Zealand produce as clean and green and trace origin. As long as you're complying with the agricultural laws of New Zealand, you comply with the certification. The government's program Fit for a Better World has the word glyphosate in it in the case study. It doesn't have the word organic in it anywhere. It's sending the wrong message. The same month that came out, Europe said they wanted 25% of all agricultural food ground certified organic by 2030. And that's our fit for the future. We've got to take this seriously as a nation. This is a organic maize crop in Northland. So yes, crops do need fertiliser or nourishment. It's how we get the nourishment into them. There's nothing wrong with that as a maize crop. You can see a group of people standing there. It's not a trick photography. We've got plenty of organic, fully certified organic crops that are producing equal to the high input conventional. One of the big questions we're going to have to ask ourselves in the industry is, are we going to be industrial or are we going to be cottage industry? So you can look at that photo there. Look at the amount of bags. That's only a fraction of it. Look at the size of the warehouse, the oil pressing machinery, the dehullers, the industry that's there. Now, these guys have the opportunity of doing the job at a commercial level, but they're in competition with people doing a lot of smaller stuff. That's something we've got to look at, because if we're going to do hemp for the New Zealand market, we've already got enough, thanks. Quite seriously. Because we're only a small population. We export. We're an exporting nation. We've got to really focus on that and focus on the high value, where we can get high value. Are we going into the high packaging, where we move very small volumes at high prices? Because oftentimes packaging is more expensive than the product in the package. Or do we go into bulk bin scenarios at high value end, so the organic, the food quality end? Think about those things before you start. This one, I had problems sending my link through, but this one actually shows as a video, or it should do, but it's not going to here. I'm sure it's not. I'll just press the button again. No, it doesn't. So that's the sort of gear, but that's going into that crop that we looked at before. So the header's having to harvest at this height, not down here. And so adapting machinery is fairly important. And that crop was successfully harvested, the whole lot of it. And in the video, you would have seen the stuff coming out the back, the fibre. We've got the Waikato low crop. Okay, now, even at that stage, we can still see down to the ground level. This is at James's place. And so that's why we get the weeds. So one of the things we do in the technologies in organic agriculture, something real simple, we see it quite common now in general agriculture. Maize rows are no longer draft horse arse width wide. They are now down to 15 inch. And that gets rid of your weed because you get the shadowing at the right time. We've done the same with wheat and barley, etc., the cereals and organics. So is this crop meeting expectation? We've heard comments today. Yes, some of it did, some of it didn't. We've got to share and develop those technologies. Hemp cake. So that's the hemp cake. It's the result of pressing the oil out. Now, I said earlier I'm into the whole food. Oil, I hate oily foods. So taking that byproduct of oil out of the hemp seed's a really good idea because then I can eat the hemp cake. Too hard to eat the hemp seed when it's, got all that oil in it and a hard shell on it. And we look at that, you can throw it into the blender. So you've got the back bowl is how it comes out of the press. The small bowl there with the chunks is just hand crushed, great in the scrambled eggs, etc. And the other one's put in a coffee grinder or blender whiz for 30 seconds and you've got powder, 32% protein. Oh, here we are back to marketing again. Chicken. Let's read the fine print. Yellow peas, extra virgin olive oil. That's what it's made out of. There's no chicken in it. Chicken-free chicken. We've got a lot of this happening now in the market. This is marketing. Won't be long, we'll have hemp-free hemp. Watch out for those things. And so the main three things we're looking at there, just the seed and the oil, the purity of that, the packaging, the damage, etc., that light does versus no light. Have a look at some of those things and around the packaging. So this product, I've got a lot of people eating it because we're not allowed to feed it to animals. And so what we've got is bulk from the press, quick squeeze for those things, and 20 seconds in the whiz, and add it to anything you like because it is a whole food. The nutritional balance of it, the omegas, the beauty of the hemp seed cake. This is considered by most in the industry at the moment as a byproduct, a waste product. It has the omega oils in balance for the human digestive system. Absolutely brilliant. No wastage in our digestive tract. The other elements there, the fat, the trace elements, etc. And we've got to look at those things, the beneficials, but there's a whole lot more in there that we don't talk about. This lady's quite interesting. I had tea with her last night down in New Plymouth. She's 2.5 years into cancer, into chemo. She's had a couple of different belts at it, cracks at it. But all the way through, she's been on hemp cake on a daily basis, 2-3 times a day, virtually every meal. She's grinding through a salt grinder, bit of seed cake onto a feed, bit of crunch onto the salad, etc. She has taken some oil, some hemp seed oil capsules, as well as the chemo. The key thing is the hairdresser and the specialists can't believe that she's still getting her hair cut every 6 weeks. The treatment she's on, she should have no hair. She's the one that's got hair. But can she get the specialists to give the hemp cake to anyone else? Nah, that's witchcraft. It's our medicine that's doing it. You're just an exception to the rule with the hair thing. And so the real things I want you to think about at the end of this is these two aspects. the perception is reality in the marketplace. If people think that industrial hemp is wacky-dacky, is nimbin, is all of those things, that's the image we've got to change. That's hard work. It's got to be constant work. That's why it's so important people talk about iHemp, M-hemp, or R-hemp. Industrial hemp, medical hemp, recreational hemp. Separate them out every chance you get so that people understand that they aren't the same product. And I'm not mixed, whoopsie, sorry. And the last one, let food be thy medicine and let medicine be thy food. And Hippocrates, the base of that was dietary is the cause of disease and the cure of disease. And that's why I'm involved in the organic sector. It's why I am really keen on the hemp product, because it is a complete food. Where we have seen animals have access to it, man, they wolf it down because they know it's good tucker. Where we see wild birds come into a crop, you can lose a crop pretty quick, and you can lose it before the machinery can harvest it, before it's lost some of the stickiness. So those are issues. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. The value part is about the integrity of the crop and the marketing and the story. And for me, that means you remove any ambiguity about it by being certified organic and growing on organic land. Keep that process pure, because everybody is trying to get into that marketplace now. Everyone in the system is trying to do chickenless chicken, beefless beef. Hey, if it's beefless beef, call it mung burger, not beef burger without the beef. Let's get some of that straight talking as a country, because if we don't, the country won't go forward, and certainly the industrial hemp industry won't, because we've got a lot of people don't want you replacing their existing income stream, and that's what will happen. So I might have taken more than my time frame, but thank you for that opportunity, and thank you guys wherever you are down the camera. And we'll see you again at one of the other events, maybe if you tune into that.
Folks, we'll just, I've got one more presentation to do, which is about the why you're here and why of hemp. Because there's, we're quite an intimate crowd, I'll probably go a little bit longer than I may do, but I'll try and explain some of those questions, like the animal veterinarian issue, as we go through. But it's just quite an exciting industry in that sense of that $1 billion. We saw that in 1938. We've seen it in Dr. Nick Marsh's report. There's incredible amounts of interest in the industry, and it's a lot to do with megatrends. And Bill touched on some of those megatrends in the sense of, sustainability. Consumers want a better story. So there's really some really interesting forces out there that are bringing us together. It's like a perfect storm of awareness. There's awareness within the consumers that want sustainable and functional foods. There's awareness within the environmental movement about climate change and the need for sustainability. And even the regulators starting to become aware that all these things really add up and they need to be paying attention, because their goals and policies are orientated towards achieving targets for export. But there's also implications, as Bill mentioned, around the health implications, the health outcomes. If we can increase health outcomes, then there's going to be less of a drain, for example, on the health system, which is a huge potential disaster looming, in the short to medium term, in effect. But so going on about the why the hemp, we're just going to discover a little bit in the next few minutes about some things. And Bill mentioned this one, the value chain, the need to go up the value chain rather than be a commodity. What can we do to really add value and differentiate ourselves in the market? And for us in the hemp industry, it's also an acknowledgement that there's so many people involved, all the way from the grower, all the way through to that person that's harvesting it, how they're preparing it and primary processing it, any testing or certification that needs to be done at that point, and then on to manufacturers and end users. And when we look at those end users, those are those food, fibre and health markets. And what we're after with this iHemp Tour 2022 was to get those end users in the room so they could have a light bulb moment. They're going to hear something about industrial hemp that just suggests to them, wow, I've got to get that into my business plan. And when that happens, we've got a huge potential demand being created, which then can feed back to the farmers who are going to grow the products. But the good thing about trying to manage that scaling of the industry is that we have an opportunity to really understand what the end user's pain point is, what they need. They can provide specifications, so it might be a building material. So they're going to tell us exactly what they want. So that's going to help us to understand how we need to manufacture that product, but also how we need to prepare the raw materials for that product, how we need to harvest in the case of construction materials, how we need to wet that product. And then it goes back to the genetics of the plant that we're going to grow for those traits that are of use for those end-use markets. So it's a very interesting time, and that's where we're trying to get this sort of collaboration going, because we as the hemp industry represent the raw material or the ingredient, but all those other industries already exist. So sure, some hemp companies will be vertically integrated, but as Bill was saying, if you're going to do that, it takes a lot of resources. Whereas a lot of these end users already exist. They just need to be aware of us as a new raw material or an ingredient if you're considering food and health products. So the why hemp for the farming. So we're just going to go from the farming, the food, the fibre and the health. Now, of course, when the farming, where farming is concerned, we're a gross nitrogen feeder, so that makes us nice in a dairy rotation particularly. We need it's an annual crop, so it's grown, planted October, November, December, harvested in March. Depending on where you are in the country, it might be as early as late February. But there's also other reasons to grow industrial hemp, and we're talking about the phytoremediation reasons. So that's cleaning and conditioning soils, so lifting heavy metals, reprogramming soils such that they can be productive again, especially in a food rotation. Conditioning soils and breaking compacted soils up with the long taproot. All of these things occur with industrial hemp growing on the farm. Again, we need some New Zealand specific information, especially about crop rotations. What's the effect on follow-on crops? You know, does it help remove nematodes and things from the potato crops or the onion crops or the carrot crops? So there's a lot of understandings we need to do about how it fits into the crop rotation. Just to answer any questions on an industrial hemp licence, to grow industrial hemp under the Misuse of Drugs Act, Industrial Hemp Regulations 2006, you do need to apply for a licence. It's not a massive process, and that licence is a general licence that you're going to apply for. Now, a general licence can be for cultivation or it can be for processing. So, for example, in processing, if you were possessing hemp seed, which is a Class C drug, you would have to have a licence to have your processing facility fit for purpose to allow you to store and work with hemp seeds. Now, those processing licenses are the same as a general license for cultivation, $511 in duty, including GST, but they last for 3 years. So again, not a huge cost if you spread it over 3 years. Now, if you're going to cultivate industrial hemp, same cost of a license, but that only lasts 1 year. But if you do your annual return every year, which is, a requirement of your license, then you can apply to have that extended, and you can do that twice. So you can extend it for another 2 years. So you can get 3 years out of that cultivation license as well. Now, the cultivator would have to be prepared because they may be required to do a THC test, which is a compliance cost, which adds another sort of $500 to $700, depending on who does your compliance test for you. So it is a potential requirement on your license, so people need to be aware of that. It takes 45 working days to get the license from the application stage to an issued license. That's the KPI for Ministry of Health. It can take longer if you've got a lot of questions or you've raised some issues that the Ministry of Health need more information on. So just be quick in getting back to them, but also give them the information they require when you get going. So that's a little bit about hemp farming. When we talk about some of the products that we're going to make, we'll refer back to the farming process also. But it's just that whole regenerative aspect that Bill was talking about. Regenerative doesn't necessarily mean organic, But it's definitely, if it's an industrial hemp crop, definitely you can be marketing it as sustainable. And again, working out how we fit into the other primary industries rotations. And we look at ourselves as a complement to the dairy, to the forestry, to all the other primary industries, because we've got a lot of complements there, especially with a short growing season such as ours. And it should be acknowledged when we're talking about that phytoremediation, we're a bioaccumulator, because we can produce 24 odd tonnes wet in a hectare in a 3 or 4 month growing cycle. Now, of course, if you're growing for seed, you're going all the way through to maturity, so that's going to take that 120 days, 4 months, or you're going to go for fibre, in which case you're going to harvest a little earlier. Generally, when the males shed the pollen, is the best time for that male plant, and the fibre from the male plant is the one that's sought after for apparel. But again, we can use dual crops, which are harvested after the seed has been harvested, then you harvest the fibre, and they still can be decorticated into that bast fibre and herd, and still find a useful economic outcome from those for those end products as well. Just some statistics on growing hemp in New Zealand. It's all done by DHB, because it's controlled by the Medicines Control part of the Ministry of Health. You'll see on the third line down, and a little bit further down Canterbury, and a little bit further down is South Canterbury. Those are the big growing areas, and as you can imagine, it's where the grain belt is in the New Zealand agricultural sense. So that's where a lot of seed's grown, and that's where predominantly the seed is the main aspect of our industry at the moment, especially given the change in legislation in 2018, which allowed us to grow seed for human consumption. Prior to that, we only had animal consumption. So that was an interesting timing, but we'll get to that in a moment. You do have examples of some areas that are growing quite quickly, but also to understand around scale and demand. Hawke's Bay is a good example of this, where it's gone from 2019 from 60 down to 9 hectares up to 89. So clearly those growers know what they need to grow for their production and are growing accordingly. So it's about knowing your end user, because I haven't met a farmer yet who hasn't asked me, how much am I going to make and who am I going to sell it to? And they're great questions, because if you don't have the answers to those, you probably shouldn't be growing industrial hemp. So hemp for the food industry. So this is a great example of one of the growing areas, because of what we've heard from the previous presenters, also about that essential fatty acid profile, the nutritional benefits of having a ratio of omega-3 and 6 in particular that's so just, if you want to design an oil for human use, that's the ratio you would come up with. But it contains all the essential amino acids as well. So it's very unusual for a food source to have such a diversity. If you're going to be growing for seeds, as we talked about before, they're going to be pollinated, and it's going to go through the whole growing cycle. Birds are the biggest pest in that space. You're going to be harvesting wet, so it's going to have a high moisture content. You've got to get that moisture out of your crop within hours. Within 2 or 3 hours, that crop's got to go down from 20+% moisture content down to 9, 10 for storage reasons. If you don't, you're going to have a bit of seed. Bit of seeds make a bit of product, and you're going to have trouble selling that. Your contractor or the person buying the seeds from you is probably going to say no, because it's not going to meet their specification.
You have to roast it or something in a kiln. You have to roast it or something, do you?
No, it's just airflow will do it.
Oh, yeah.
So in silos on the farm, heated air is obviously quicker, but you've got to really get that moisture out, and the birds are the big issue. With seed oil, and we'll get to that one in a moment. But so going back to the nutritional profile makes it a very healthy crop for human use, but there are companies that are multiplying seeds for northern hemisphere hemp growers, because we're on exactly the right latitudes as the northern hemisphere hemp industry. So we can, in effect, give them a second crop every year by bringing them to the southern hemisphere. And of course, you can also use the oil after it's gone past its use by date from a food point of view as an industrial lubricant. You can break it down into its prescriptive chemicals. It can be used to clean your leather or stain your wood. So there's lots of other uses. The big news in the food area at the moment is that there's been an application to Food Standards Australia New Zealand that went in last year that's looking at allowing hemp leaf and flower sprouts and roots to be used as hemp food. I'd argue that sprouts are already available to us and the roots are available to us. But if that opens up that nutritional profile as being something that is very much a functional food, it will bring in that cannabinoid, terpene and flavonoids into that market as well. So we're hoping that application progresses well through that Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, because our food policies jointly govern with Australia. So some interesting things happening in the food industry. There's excerpts of the chart I had up previously, which is an inside cover of the 5-minute guide, just to show you some of those end products that don't necessarily have to do with food. So you're looking at detergents and other aspects as well. But if you are going to go for food grade, your enemies are heat, light and air. So don't expose it to heat, light and air, because especially light, one photon of light will knock off 30,000 molecules out of the hemp oil. So you can imagine how quickly your oil is going to get rancid. So it's got to be in dark bottles. It should be processed in the dark or very dimly lit. So these are all things that need to be considered, especially around best practice, because if we are going to export, which we have to do as a New Zealand crop, then we're going to have to pay attention to these very high quality issues, because that's, again, a learning that we've had it from the wine industry, who have got together and maintained these very high standards. And that's an opportunity we have as well. And there's lots of things we can learn from these other primary industries, the wine, the kiwi fruit, are great examples of lessons that we can build into our system as we get going. Because if we don't have time to reinvent the wheel, we need resilient supply chains straight away. So we need to get onto these things as soon as possible. So why hemp in the fibre industry? Well, again, if you were in the room and you were coming from a textile point of view, or a roading point of view, or a construction industry, the things I'm about to say may have triggered these these light bulb moments for you. So naturally, the hemp fibre is antibacterial, anti-static, antimicrobial, antifungarial, and will stop 95% of the UV light, along with being one of nature's longest, strongest fibres. So all of those reasons make it really applicable to all sorts of end users, particularly in your medical devices, linen for hospitals, sanitary products for the ladies, all of these things where those sort of aspects, those qualities, those inherent qualities of industrial hemp will really make a big difference in those products. And again, it's about telling the story. So the beginning of the telling the story from a consumer point of view is hearing that it comes from a sustainable source, and you're back to these annual crops in rotation. The big news from the fibre industry is that in 2021, a joint venture between NZHIA's CP Wool and the Carfield organisation and Hemp NZ got brought in a decorticating machine. So finally in New Zealand, we have a machine, a whole production line, in fact, in Christchurch, that can process industrial hemp into the hurd and the fibre. So now you've got people working with hempcrete building that are able to source the hurd, which has been a bit of a sticking point for a lot of people who wanted to build with hempcrete because they wanted the herd to come from New Zealand, and now it's available in New Zealand. And that fibre, there's an example of a mulch mat on the table, and that's sort of one of the uses of the fibre. Now, those uses, the insulation panels, hempcrete, they're pretty low tech. Just to touch on hempcrete for a moment, it's a monolithic building method whereby you mix hemp hurd with lime and water, and it petrifies. So it goes from a vegetable state to a mineral state, sticks it away to concrete, doesn't require reinforcing, and you tap it down in between shuttering, and you remove the shuttering, and you've got an exterior cladding and an interior insulation completely finished. Now, the reason why I've gone into a bit of detail about hempcrete houses is because not only are they very fire resistant and meet a lot of all the requirements of the building code, although there isn't a binder that is actually accredited at this point, and that's a rate determining step for the industry locally. There are imported binders which allow you to actually complete the hemp processing and get it signed off. But the really interesting thing is how healthy these homes are. They don't have black mold. They just breathe better. So you, again, going back to those health outcomes, we're probably looking down the barrel of a $14 billion bill for bronchitis and respiratory illness, let alone the inconvenience and the uncomfortableness of kiddies that have these problems. So that could all be alleviated if we took our housing stock seriously and looked at alternatives such as hempcrete to build these healthy homes, which also don't require as much energy because they're warm in the winter and cool in the summer as they maintain an ambient temperature. So it's a really important opportunity for the industry, the fibre industry in particular, to scale, because if we had a lot of hemp houses being built, we'd need a lot of hemp to be grown. So that's a little bit about the construction side, but of course we can talk about insulation from the bast fibres, we could talk about medium density fibre boards and SIP panels and those sort of things, which of course everybody's now aware of what's happening with GIBs. So resilient supply chains is now understood as being, we need to be a lot more resilient than we are. So, but these are all pretty sort of semi-low tech uses. And some of the high-tech uses where we're really getting some traction, as we discussed, automotive car parts and things like that. We don't have a big automotive industry, but we have a massive yachting industry. Coach builders, a lot of people with tiny homes, they're all going to have to be kitted out, people doing their kitchens all the time. So all that cabinetry is available. All those composites can be used in that space. 3D printing filament and other end uses such as the plastics and really getting back into that composite area. So there's a lot of sustainable, there's an example of a hemp hurd mixed with mycelium as a packaging material on the table. Some really interesting stuff happening in there. And this is acknowledgement also of some of our R&D community who are really engaged in this space. The Crown Research Institutes are all talking to each other around the cannabis industry. Obviously, low THC industrial hemp has a role to play in that. And they're very engaged with the new product development, plant and food, scion, ag research. They're right there for the industry. And in the case of our other part of the ecosystem and R&D is our universities, and they're coming up with some amazing new developments, and it's been a privilege to hear those presentations during our tour. So and we're hoping to be able to provide excerpts of these recordings to those regarding those implications, so these people in industry can really catch up quickly about the potential for industrial hemp. So the fibre is just wide-ranging. Again, the excerpts from the 5-minute guide into that plastics. We haven't really talked about the paper and the fuel, but those are sort of really big end users that in the sense of the raw material with such qualities, we should be looking for higher end value products. And of course, in the apparel side, we need a little bit more infrastructure and bringing back our manufacturing capability in some of those spaces. But the guys down the decortication mill are really looking at replicating their decorticator in other locations and getting to the stage where they can process to provide the raw materials for these other industries, so they can move up from just making geotech textiles and horse bedding and herd for the construction industry into some of these higher value markets. So why hemp for the health industry? Well, we've talked a little bit about the opportunities in the nutraceutical part, and thank you, Dr. Nick Marsh, for the presentation earlier tonight. And it's just an amazing space because some of these industry people are already, of course, set up to produce natural health products, but it's one of those industries that doesn't, as like the fibre industry that requires a lot of capital expenditure, this one could be done quite quickly. Now, what we're talking about with the health industry, it's not going to be a pollinated plant that you're after. You're looking probably for a female plant, and you're going to be growing that for the cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids. Now, of course, THC is a controlled drug, CBD is prescribed medicine. There's a lot of other minor cannabinoids in that space, and all the terpenes that are available to you. So if we can get into those markets and work with other New Zealand botanicals, there's just huge amounts of export potential. Now, when we've been going around the country, we've been looking at areas where the industry would suit particular aspects. We talked about Ashburton and Canterbury, where there's a lot of grain grown, so there's a lot of infrastructure, combines, dryers, seed cleaners, those sort of things. So those industries exist in those areas, but in the case of the Thames Coromandel, you'd be looking at a health industry, would be, in my opinion, would be a really great place to start, because you want to be growing unpollinated plants, which means you're working locally, you're in sync with the local economy, the illicit local economy.
They're already doing.
But you've also got there's a lot of infrastructure that you've already got in this area. As you go across the Hauraki Plains, they're probably a little damp in the peak, because when we're growing, we don't like wet feed. It needs to be ideally a well-drained sandy loam type soil. But if you go further down to the Matter, then you could be going into a large area of fibre cropping, because there's some good infrastructure already in place. And as I say, those decortication mills will have to be replicated into other areas. So the South Waikato would definitely be looking at a fibre crop as well. Just to acknowledge the NZHIA's why, MPI put out a report in June last year regarding facilitating an industry, and there were some useful things in there, because it mentioned about getting the industry together and supporting the industry from a government point of view, but they had to try and quantify it, and they came up with 4 scenarios which range from 11 to 774 million by 2030. So huge diversity. Now, they ended up with scenario 2 being a prediction of a $30 million industry by 2030. Now, of course, we've, as the industry, we've got a lot higher aspirations for the industry. We're a lot more enthusiastic, but we are realistic as well. And, the $30 million, we're just about there already with the food industry. Now that the fiber's coming on, we'll easily get there in the next year or two, and that's well in advance of 2030. But the big opportunity there is this opportunity where we get all parts of the plant to use, full plant utilisation. So there is no waste streams, and there's revenue streams from all those parts of the plant are being able to be realised in the food, fibre and health sectors. So yes, we do have some regulatory issues. It's not so much about our regulations. They're really clear. They issue a licence to grow industrial hemp, and then only industrial hemp can be made into hemp products. The crossover becomes when it goes into other legislation. So a good example of that is the people that at MPI, ACVM, which is the Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines people, they're the group that have said we can't feed it to animals. Now, that's just not animals, that's production animals and companion animals. So straight away, you could split the two and get access to the companion animals. We could work on our nutraceutical industry for companion animals, why any health issues or medical issues get worked out. All of those things are available to us, but we need to be getting it back into rotations with production animals as well. So we need to understand. Now, the reason why they changed their mind in 2018 when human food was allowed, hemp seed was allowed for human food consumption, was that they were very concerned about the perceived risk of THC and CBD metabolites remaining in milk and meat products and sensitive export markets. So they didn't want to see, didn't want to have the situation where a sensitive export large market, say, Saudi Arabia turns around and says, hey, you guys have had animals that have been producing this milk in a crop of hemp. There might be CBD or THC in that product. Now, there's clearly not going to be any noticeable amounts of THC because of low THC, but we need to do the study around CBD. And because it does accumulate in meat and milk. And so what's the stand down period? So there's a whole lot of understandings we want, and we don't want to be responsible for bringing down our white protein industry. It's not something that we want to be famous for. We want to work with other primary producers. So big issues there. When I say white protein, milk, red protein, animal products, green protein, plants. So borrowed that from Brad Lake at Brothers Green. Thank you, Brad. So there's some huge implications there, but it's just it was a knee-jerk reaction The reason why it's still a problem is because they're holding on to the single molecule argument. So because unlike the food law, which has a tolerance of how much THC is acceptable and how much CBD is acceptable in beverages, oils and seed products, protein powders, etc., but there's nothing in the ACVM. So therefore the tolerance is zero. Now, if you take that to a lab and say, hey, tell me there's zero in this, they'll say, well, no, I can't do that because I can get you a non-detect at this level of specificity, at this level, but I can't give you a definite no, there's no CBD or THC. And so I then say to them that the ACVM are telling me it's got to be no, and then it takes me probably 5 minutes to wait for that lab person to stop laughing because it's impossible to achieve. So you've got this, you'll hear it a lot in the hemp industry, this chicken and egg scenario. It's very much one of those situations. So something we'll have to give, and it will give eventually, but it's we found that the regulator doesn't, they say they don't interpret the regulations, they do, but it's about policy. We've got to make it good policy for them to do this. So it's got to have positive outcomes for all the other policies that the government has. Health, back to housing. But who's the ministry that helps with that policy? It's such a wide beast that you've got a real lobbying problem there. So we've got this branding issue around our narrative, and then we've got this whole lobbying issue. And unfortunately, we haven't found a champion, an MP or particularly a minister that we had back in the 2000s when you had Rod Donald and Ed King, Philip Buncle. These people listened to what the industry was saying and said, let's do this and give those buggers a chance. And that's what they did. They gave us some regulations to do that. But we haven't found that same sort of vibe these days. And it's just not trickling up through the working with the bureaucrats. They need to hear it from a minister in a lot of cases. So that's the why for the NZHIA, because we've got an aspirational total of that $2 billion industry, and we want to be working towards that. And there's a lot of people that are going to be involved, and some of them don't even know it just yet. But it's such a good news story when they do find out that we're very happy that they discovered industrial hemp as a raw material for their business. So just to acknowledge that everybody that registered for the events this evening and everybody that's attended a tour event, there will be a gift basket presented at the end of the tour. So you're all in the draw for that one, which reminds me there's underneath a seat, and I'll save you guys time. It's that seat with the yellow tag, which makes you the closest.
I've wanted that, thought it was reserved.
Okay, well, that makes you the closest. So we do have a spot prize from Hemp NZ.
Oh, wow. And
I'd like to present that to yourself. If I may, I'd like to take a photo.
Oh, yes, be very happy to receive that.
For publicity reasons.
Yeah.
And everybody that joins the NZHIA or renews their membership over the period of the tour will going to win a just an outstanding gift basket from Hark and Zander, which is an amazing range of products that in a cosmetic sense using hemp oil, and they're just wonderful products. The next step for us as the NZHIA, we would like to, obviously for joining, I've got another slide for that one as well, but we're working on sort of a hemp industry strategy reset and a capability development program. So we've got to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of work to do, and if we can unify the industry behind some shared visions that everybody can agree on, respecting that everybody's going to have their own business plans, their own intellectual property they want to develop, but there's things we can do together to collectively move the industry forward. And that's where we're working on the Aotearoa New Zealand Hemp Alliance portal, which will be a reservoir of a whole lot of the information captured from these meetings that we've had in the tour 2022, but also our previous summits in 2018 and 21, and a set of webinars we did in 2020. All of those resources will be there and available and referenced up so people can get onto their hemp journey a lot quicker and work out exactly who they need to meet to move forward. I just want to acknowledge Callaghan Innovation also, because they do have some roadmaps on their website for food, fibre and medicine, and they're seed, fibre and medicine. They're well worth looking at. They're dynamic documents, so they're growing all the time. There's more and more research being put into that space. They've just come out with a white paper on waste streams of the industrial hemp, looking at the waste streams from the seed industry, the potentially from the fibre, well, starting now, the fibre industry. They also looked at leaves, flowers and roots, a little bit more from the medical side, but it's definitely a well-researched, well-referenced document that comes up with some amazing ideas, which, again, business people should have a quick look at or in-depth look at, because some of the business plans that they're describing are available to us, and that would help us with that full plant utilisation. Te Puni Kōkiri have some fact sheets on industrial hemp growing, and some statistical information around yields and returns, and there's some really relevant information for iwi growers there as well. And I do believe that the iwi community have a massive role to play in this industry that is emerging in New Zealand. Big thanks to our speakers from OrganicAg, Bill Quinn and Dr. Nick Marsh from Next Corporation, and the regional support from the Thames Coromandel District Council, who have helped us to promote the event. And I've got to say, the economic development agencies at all the places that we've visited in this tour, and all the business development managers at the universities and Crown Research Institutes, they've been well engaged in this topic. They can see the potential and want to be involved in this industry as well. So it's a great opportunity and a good news story. Big thank you to our sponsors, which is AgMart, who provided the funding to pay for the advertising, to pay to go on tour. Without AgMart, we couldn't have done this, and they're just amazing for new and innovative crops, particularly, and other agricultural developments that haven't quite got there but have great potential, and they've really supported. They've helped us with our summits in the past. Thank you to the NZHIA for putting together the information and inviting the speakers along, and to our spot prize winner and spot prize sponsor, Hemp NZ. So my final call is just an observation that, you know, we're a membership-driven organisation. We're the volunteers. With the cart before the horse, because we're not quite like the wine industry. We don't have that many $1 million players and that sort of thing. We definitely don't have 4 or 5 lobbyists or lawyers working from a head office somewhere, but we want to get to that stage. So by joining the association, you'll get a whole lot of information that isn't covered in our public newsletters. We have a $25 supporting or student membership, a $50 individual, and a $100 business. And it's just a great way that we can keep you involved with our newsletters, and their resources page is really being worked on at the moment. So we're hoping to bring a lot of information in that space. So that's the end of the slide presentation. Because the panel isn't necessarily all here or available, I'm afraid I'm your panel for this evening. We do have a couple of questions online, which I'll go to now. And then if you guys have any other questions, we'll work our way through them. I'm not sure what the time is. 9:34. So we're planning for a 10 o'clock finish. So let's see how we go with the questions. So let me just go online. Thank you very much for the online people. You've persevered well. Can we get the recipe or the process to make hemp cake, please? So when Bill's talking about hemp cake, it's the byproduct of the cold pressing. You would have seen those bowls on Bill's presentation. So when hemp seed goes to a factory and is pressed in a cold press to produce the oil, the cake or the meal is what we talk about as being the byproduct of that process. So that's just a raw material. And if you want to get hold of some of that, please just send me an email or Bill Quinn an email, and we can send that out to you, because it's at the moment it's part of a waste stream. So we do need lots of people to use it. And as Bill said, without the oil in it, it still has all the dietary fibres. So it's still a very, very healthy product to consume, and really easy to consume as well. Another question, is there a hemp manufacturing plant we can send our hemp to? Sorry if I missed that section, as already mentioned. So you're looking at toll manufacturers there. So there will be some people that produce, if it's a seed that you're growing, they may be interested in toll processing it, but you've got to be careful because they'll have some specifications because they don't want to bring in something that's going to compromise the integrity of their processing system. So they'll want it to be clean to a certain degree. It'll have to meet a microbial analysis such as their own seed would need to be before they can even touch it. If it doesn't, then there's all sorts of steps that are going to cost you even more money. So realistically, if you're going to go into that seed market, you're going to have a bit of a think about that process before you start planting lots of area. If you're talking about the fibre, it's freight that's the killer. So, although people have sent some bales down to Christchurch from the North Island, it wasn't the norm and it was to prove a point. You're really needing a decorticator up here. And there's a few types of decorticator. There's some real manual ones that are very small, hand-fed, and you don't have to go to the whole processing line, but it is going to be something that you need. I mean, I've decorticated in a way with a wood chipper, and that was very easy to do, but you end up with a lot of fibre with your herd. So that's where all this production line comes in, because that's when they have to comb all that sort of thing out. You can, in the case of hemp wood, if we look at a construction material, what they're doing is using the whole stems and just applying considerable pressure to them to make a laminated, as it were, wood board, like a medium density fibre board with a pea protein binder possibly as well. So there's other ways and other uses. I mean, you could have it on the farm, mulch it up and chip it up and use it as mulch. You could do craft paper, depending on the scale you're doing. And this is our whole issue within the industry. How much can we scale up the industry and how much is the demand? Because the paper industry will use our fibre because it's long and strong and will help them with their recycled paper, but they may need 5,000, 50,000 tonnes a quarter. And we're not ready for that. So how can the industry scale that up? So you've got to be a little bit aware of that and really pay attention to, if you're going to go into it commercially as a grower, make sure that you've got somebody in mind that can help you with all those production steps around harvesting, but also some end buyer in mind as well. And once they're lined up, then you're ready to go. Until that happens, my advice would be to carry on making the arrangements for that to happen. So those are the two questions online, which we've answered. So I'm going to give those a tick. And so from the audience, do you guys have any questions that we need to, may have been mentioned that we need to unpack a bit further, or there could be something that we completely missed?
Yeah, I'm quite interested in phytoremediation. And obviously, if the plant is a hyperaccumulator of heavy metals, is that an issue for the food ones as well, that it may have been grown in a place where there are some sort of toxins in the soil that will then be taken into stems and leaves?
Okay, I'm probably okay without repeating that, because I think the online people would have heard that because the microphone's just sitting there. So quite a few issues involved in that. I mean, if you're going to grow for food, ideally you should know what your land's been used for, what's gone onto your land in the past for those reasons, because you don't want to be picking up a contaminant and putting it into the food chain. Now, if you're going to grow it as a phytoremediation crop, then possibly not using it as food, so maybe more as a fibre crop would make more sense. But I think we need to do some studies. We need some really New Zealand-specific studies on that, because how do we fit in? Like, for example, with phytoremediation, when we were in Blenheim, Kirsty Harkness is growing, who makes the Harkins-Zander cosmetic range, is growing hemp in the interrows of the vines.
Yeah.
And, she's into year 3 of the 3-year study, so hopefully some information will be made publicly available about that. But it was about using it as a mulch and, mulching it down. It just really, really worked well. It kept the moisture in the soil. You didn't have to mow, so you weren't going across the soil as much, compactation, that sort of thing. You were saving on diesel costs because you're just letting it grow. And there were some other really beneficial observations that were made out of the study as well. So very exciting from that point of view, but how does it fit in? And what are the implications? These are, especially for that phytoremediation aspect, because we've got some tremendously polluted soil. I mean,
well, around here with all the mining, arsenic is a real issue.
Arsenic here, you go
lead.
Other places, lead, and then you're under orchards, and you go to other places, it's market gardening, and cadmium's an issue. DDT, we only just stopped spraying that not so long ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got some tremendous issues there. So if you could use plants, and again, we don't like wet feet, but if we could be a catalyst for the use of plants in this way, like, mycelium or mushrooms closer to the water, or it might be a combination of those two to lift these heavy metals and recondition soils. But if we can encourage that, then I think we're going to really make some real differences. Because if we can convert that back to food production, then
once you've
and it may only take, but it might only take 2 or 3
cycles.
Yeah, and that's the objective of a rotational crop. What do we put in with the other parts of the rotation? Yeah, no. So the phytoremediation, I think, is a good one to get started with, just to grow on your farm for those reasons,
and to get an understanding of what it does, what's there to start with, and what it will take out, and what's the effect on the plant itself, and having those worse soil contaminants now.
Yes, where does it accumulate? Because if you're going to leave the stem on the ground and let it decompose, have you actually achieved it? So what are you going to take off? Do we have to remove the roots? Is it the leaves where it's all going to be, or the flowering heads? All of these things. And people will tell me that there's been some studies, and there has. This is the most studied plant around at the moment, admittedly a lot around cannabinoids and medical and health aspects, but there's a lot of work going into this space, but it needs a lot more. It definitely needs New Zealand specific stuff.
Sorry, you got a question?
Yeah, eventually.
Okay.
No, just looking at this product here, this is produced from the leaf, is that correct? Or the seed?
The seed.
So how does that work in terms of the oils being squeezed out of it, but there's still some remaining?
Yes, because you're not likely to get all the oils out.
No, I realise that. So in terms of going rancid,
potentially, yes.
Potentially. So
Yeah,
it's
so
sort of
keep
shelf
it,
life.
yes, so keep it out of the heat, light and air.
Yeah.
Keep it in an airtight container, refrigerator if you can.
Yeah.
These are all good things to do. But because it wouldn't have the same quantity of oil, it would be slightly of the difference there.
Thank you.
So would those seed cakes be able to be fed to veterinarians then? Is they're not out of the leaf? There's still no. Because there'll be trace elements, and we can't get zero molecule.
So that's the class C. That's the one they're treating as being almost more potent or something, aren't they?
What's that, sorry?
I mean, the seeds were you said that they were treated as a class C controlled substance.
Oh, yeah, that's not to do with the fact that they've got THC in the seeds.
No.
There's no THC in the seeds.
Right.
There'll be THC or CBD residues and other cannabinoids because the seed is grown on the bract of the plant. So it's just washing them off will take care of most of that. It's mainly to do with the fact that cannabis seed can be grown into a cannabis plant.
It's the potential.
Yes.
If you've watched Cheech and Chong, occasionally he'd turn up with $5 million worth of weed, and it was just a seed. It was like, oh man, this is a weed, man. It's like, seeds, man.
So that's the sort of, which doesn't make any sense because when I lived in England, you could go to the markets and buy a kilo of seeds, and you'd store that in the cupboard at home because it's in a perfect little cover called the seed husks, and it didn't go off because the oil wasn't exposed to heat, light, and air, and it was just a lovely way of storing them. And to be honest, when you make a milk out of the whole seed, I think it just has a little bit more, which is similar to what the people in the health industry talk about with entourage effect. The ability of all the parts of the plant to really add value.
Can you just tell me with the understanding of the presence of THC in a plant and the testing for it? Like I would assume that it has to be a female and it has to be flowering in order to have the THC content, or is that in the stems and leaves and that sort of thing as well? At what point in its life cycle do you know what percentage of THC it's going to be?
For our THC compliance test, as a licensed grower, you would generally do it 2 or 3 weeks before harvest. So, and that's generally a seed crop. So you would have, so it's been pollinated if it's a seed crop, and it's got a flowering head, and it's now full of seeds. And you would take 10 samples from your area, and you would put those in individual packets, and you'd send them off to ESR or Hall's labs, and they would then take them out of the individual packets, combine them, and do the test. But it's a requirement of the regulations. Anyway, so some little things like that are just annoying.
So you've basically grown it to maturity before you know whether that's legal or not.
Well,
I mean, your seed, presumably, you think it's going to be. The genetics are for low THC, right?
Okay, so to handle that, then, as a general license holder, you're only allowed to grow approved varieties.
Okay.
So there was a time when lots of people didn't have to do a THC test because they were growing approved varieties. They'd done the same thing the year before and had no problems.
Yeah.
And then about 3 years ago, we started to get these adverse THC results.
Cross-pollinating.
Possibly. We need to do a little bit more work on it, but some of these THC tests went above 0.35.
So for a wild stock, wasn't it?
Well, it shouldn't matter because that might affect whatever you grow later.
Yeah.
But the understanding would be our pollen is going to bring we're going to make your marijuana into hemp. And that's a problem for the marijuana growers out there, and that's why they don't like pollen, which is the issue with the female plants. But so if you had an unpollinated plant, if you grew a female plant, you would still do the THC test in the same way. It may have slightly more THC because it's produced more because it's trying to attract the pollen. So it's a very sticky, trying to get any pollen in the air, it wants to get it in. So you could argue that it was an unpollinated plant that had an adverse THC reaction. That's a possibility. But the likelihood is that it's simpler than that because now they're testing the THC content has been redefined in the regulations since 2018 to be both THC and THCA, the acid precursor.
Yeah.
So before it was just THC.
Right.
So then you say to the Ministry of Health, well, clearly that's why we're getting these adverse results because now you're combining 2 lots of THC. And then they'd say, well, no, because the previous testing regime heated up the sample.
I was going to say, isn't it always THCA before it's heated and then it becomes THC with heat?
So their argument is that before the testing regime meant the way they did the test meant you heated it up and it became decarboxylated into the THC anyway, so you're still getting the one. I'm not, personally, I'm not that happy about it. I think I can convince the board of the NZHIA that we've got an issue here. There's a lot of people within the industry that acknowledge a big issue.
Yeah.
At the moment, those adverse THC test results aren't affecting people that are growing broadacre. It seems to be small growers doing something else, possibly, but it hasn't hit a big grower. But as soon as you're a farmer and you're about to harvest your 10 hectares
and you're 0.5 over the line,
and somebody says destroy the crop under Section 44 notice, that's the end of our industry.
Yes, for sure.
So we've got some real things to work through there.
Yeah.
But it's not hypocritical. I mean, there's no negative health effects of this THC. We can go at pastures with glyphosates, and if they show animals grazing, and they don't test for glyphosate levels in animal products, do they?
Well, in food products, definitely they do in medicinal cannabis products, obviously pesticides and the massive regime of testing. But it is very hypocritical.
So hugely poison glyphosates we can consume.
Basically.
But unless you buy organic.
Well, organic, but these are the this is a situation that we're in, and many New Zealanders are thinking, scratching their head, thinking the same thing, aren't they? I mean, it's just clearly worth a question, and why. But it's from the Ministry of Health's point of view, it's about risk control, and their risk is THC. And even though they fundamentally acknowledge that we've got less than less. I mean, most of this THC testing is coming in at 0.01. So 0.35 is a long way away, even if you double that with the THCA. So we shouldn't be a risk for them. We should be considered just another arable crop, another horticultural crop. Horticultural crop, I mean, in the same sense of growing a female plant, as opposed to broadacre arable harvested by combines and that sort of thing.
So a male plant will never be an issue in terms of that. A male plant in an industrial hemp crop is equivalent to a female plant in terms of our fibre output?
No, in fact, the male plant, when it's shedding its pollen, is probably the best fibre you can get.
Okay.
For an apparel industry. But, it wouldn't be a problem because once the male sheds the pollen, the male dies, and so it's never going to be around at harvest time if you're going to full maturity.
Okay.
So the male's job is over pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And
standard, isn't it?
so really, it's all about the female plant.
Okay.
As it should be.
If they're seeing with the food, with feeding it to stock was an issue, can't you eliminate that by feeding it before it flowers? Like saying you can grow this crop, but you have to feed it in January or December or something like that.
Have a fodder crop and get the beast to walk through it.
Yeah.
Pick it up and they put. It can sprout again, yeah, but it would be, in my opinion, because cannabinoids are only just starting. They're a long way away from being at their peak at maturity. So it would be pretty safe, but we would just have to do the science and understand, is there a stand down period that you need to do before milking? These people do a lot of this with antibiotics and all sorts of other things in that whole animal world. So it's not something unusual to put into the rotation, but some careful risk-based analysis to come up with the protocol for that. Fine. I can't see why they wouldn't go for it. And I think there is an appetite there because you're getting so many questions now from would-be growers about this whole animal issue.
So is anyone actually doing the work on it?
There are people. There's overseas. You've got the Hemp Feed Coalition, and there's been a couple of studies that have been going. They'll be into their second or third year now in Australia. Some of these are on sheep, some of them are on chickens. So there's some work being done, but globally, this animal issue is an issue.
So nothing in New Zealand.
No, not recently, because you can't get the sign off on it. We are working with at Massey University.
Yeah.
They're very interested. They have a school of poultry, so their chicken people are really interested in doing it because they know, once this whole thing gets resolved, that the big chicken producers are going to say, well, what is the feed value? What's the nutritional value? What is it worth? And then they'll be able to see the marketplace. So they want to get ahead of that curve to get their study around that. And again, it would be useful for people overseas. And it depends on the broilers versus.
If the wild birds can sort it out, then don't tell Teagle about it.
Well, that's it. And
it's great food, eh? I mean,
and the wild birds are just picking up on the essential fatty acid profile,
And then flying off and dying, obviously.
Obviously, because they come back there.
But there's actually a chicken company in Thailand that's feeding theirs cannabis and getting away with having to feed them antibiotic.
That's the other thing. That's the sort of those are the ones that I'd much rather study than trying to study something to prove a compliance point.
That'd be too healthy, those chickens.
But imagine it though, less antibiotics, or they gain weight quicker, or you can wean your pig earlier, or it produces more milk solids, or gains weight. These are all the things.
To complicate issues, don't we?
Yes, and what you've got there is, because I had a cool conversation with some young guys in Nelson, and they say, "Oh man, we've just done this all," and they were using kiwi fruit as a byproduct. Got an investor and just racing your head. But unfortunately, if you put cannabis in a conversation, it seems to, skew it.
Short-sightedness is not good.
Is there another name you can call it?
That's it. So we've got a branding issue, haven't we? Is there another name? Changing narrative.
It's kiwi fruit.
Flax.
Because it's not just you know, I mean, you know, if you had a hemp product and you wanted to use Facebook, for example, to promote your product, which a lot of people do, that's their business model. You can't use Facebook. They'll ban your ads. So Twitter's the same. So because it's, and that includes hemp. It's not because we're cannabis marijuana. It's just as soon as you mention hemp or have a leaf, that's in the story.
So we know where that's coming from. So
yeah, but those are the sort of things you're up against if you're trying to build a new startup and you can't use one of the world's most useful platforms. It's a considerable issue because to overcome that, it's going to take you a bit of, a lot of money.
So those plants that you showed initially in one of the earlier slides, there was the fibre one was a big, huge plant, the other ones were small. What sort of tonnage per hectare are you actually looking at growing?
So for a fibre crop?
Or just for the big plants?
It would vary again. What's the spec? What's the end user want all the way back? But, you know, you're on target for probably 10 tonnes dry weight out of a hectare. And so, you know, some of a medium-sized house might take 2 or 3 hectares, or 1.5, depending on the size of the house. Which, when you start looking at the numbers, isn't really that much of a game changer. And it would be, you know, because it's a great demand. But like, I mean, you know, we've got to start thinking really big. You know, like let's change, you know, plastics and packaging and things like that. But it's not going to work if we're 100x times the current price, because the market's not going to take it. So, you know, how to get that, how to manage that scale, as economies of scale. And because there are people out there that are willing to sort of support it to a certain degree, those early adopters, but it's got to get into that mainstream. And to get into the mainstream, we've got to overcome this narrative issue. We've got to, you know, quite a lot going on there. But these are all opportunities as well, because there's a lot of really, you know, wonderful people out there with ideas in this space. And it's just about working together, I think. There's a lot of it.
Well, you know what? Was it Bill said that you can actually land Canadian stuff here cheaper than we could grow it and harvest it probably?
No, that's not probable. That's a fact.
So
buy New Zealand made. You know, I mean, we're not going to have a seed industry if we don't support those seed.
Yeah, but we don't have a government that'll let us do it.
No, we've got the seed industry, but they're competitively up against imported product. And, you know, for a baker, the cost of goods sold incredibly important. But, you know, for you as a consumer, you know, when you go to the shop and say, do I want to buy that oil or that oil, buy the New Zealand made one. But how do you know which is New Zealand made? So we could come up with a brand or something, you know, grown in New Zealand, which all the growers in New Zealand could use. That's low-hanging fruit that the industry can show that we're united behind. That's something we can all agree, that's a good idea. And let's do that, and that's a value. So how many other things like that can we do to really go up? But consumers have got an incredible responsibility. You know, I had everything I'm wearing, so shirt, t-shirt, jeans, socks, shoes, all made of industrial hemp. Now, if I ask that same question, well, maybe not. But, you know, most people, you know, how many people have got a hemp garment in their room, to a room full of hemp people, and only a few put their hand up. But in a few years' time, a lot more will put their hand up. And the reason why they're going to do it is because as soon as they discover it and realise, man, this is just cool in the summer and warm in the winter, and clothes that wear in, they don't wear out, they're moulded to my body, this is great, this is my favourite shirt for going gardening in or whatever, then they're all going to be in favour, you know, and then they'll start supporting it. So, you know, the consumer's got a big role to play in what's happening in the world.
What was, you know, the pelletized leaves that he showed, what was the end user wanting to use those for? And we're shipping them to the UK or something like that.
It could have been for biomass to, you know, do your extractions or make a CBD product.
Oh, he wanted them for some. Oh, okay.
They're going to be exported, but because it's leaf and flower, depending on what you've got, because I would have argued that that's a hemp product at that point.
Yeah, well, I think that was what they ran up against, wasn't it? But is he saying there is some use for just the sort of the waste product in terms of the leaf and that sort of thing, just as a mulch or something? Perhaps I thought it was a soil conditioner or something.
Absolutely.
Maybe look like
compost.
Yeah,
definitely used as compost for the beginning. But
yeah.
Again, though, those high value markets, higher value markets, and the minor cannabinoids. We talk about THC, controlled drugs, CBD, prescription medicine, but when I start, which are both cannabinoids. And when I started in the 90s, it was like 60 cannabinoids they knew about. Now there's
150.
120, 150. So the science is just starting to come out about these products. So these minor cannabinoids, there are all opportunities there as well because they're not controlled. You do have to deal with the CBD. You do have to deal with the THC issue. Shouldn't be too much problem with THC, as we discussed, low THC industrial hemp. But, these are markets that are available. Terpenes, that Nick picked up on in Australia.
Yeah. So does your industrial hemp flower have the same suite of terpenes and things that a THC high flower would have? So all of those things exist independent of THC?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And CBD too?
Well, the rule of thumb is, in general, is high THC, low CBD.
Okay.
And then, so the converse of that is low THC, high CBD.
Oh, okay.
So, in fact, we could probably produce more. So they've got this.
So in the medical, they call them type 1, type 2 and type 3 plants.
Yeah.
Type 1's high THC.
Yeah.
Smoke it, get stoned.
Yeah.
Type 2 is your CBD, anti-inflammatory, good for sports people. Then type 3 is your combination or a hybrid.
Yeah, okay.
And then so what selectively breeding has been done over in America is extraordinarily high CBD plants, which are like 20 to 1.
Yeah.
And in Amsterdam and smokable places, they have the opposite, 20 to 1.
Yeah.
But in the health system, we're trying to look for a 1 to 1.
Yeah.
And that's a better balance for cannabinoid ratios.
Which I think is probably
like
the
we're
way
saying before,
nature's
the
supposed to be, yeah.
But even for stock feed, those pellets sort of farmers with higher nutritional value than like the imported palm kernel.
Yeah.
But my chickens didn't want to eat them. They didn't taste very nice.
Really?
No, they're a bit plain, but molasses with it, the salt, you can
Plus you're not destroying orangutan habitat.
I mean, that palm kernel expeller is coming in by the container load, but it's cheap.
You already pay for it, don't you?
Well, less than $4.50 a tonne.
Yeah, that's not cheap.
You get a free shipping container. Those are 7,000 now.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting observation because when I tried to find a market for some of this hemp cake and things, it's like, will that animal producer pay me $1,500 a tonne? Will they pay me $1,000 a tonne? No. And when I got it down to 500, I started to get a bit of interest. But there's, but we've got to sell it as an additive then, a like for like feed. How do I convince you of that?
Food value.
I've got to get the feed value, exactly.
Yeah, if you're going to go and so sort of the point I was getting towards, if you're picking on any particular part of the plant, there's a waste part of it. That waste part of it, if you can nail the stock feed part of it, would be no longer waste because that will go anywhere. So we had a feed out of squash people's right? Kiwi fruit from onions from
Because lemon kiwi fruit, it's still good for a cow to eat.
Yeah, no one wants it.
No, but
you've got to pay to get rid of it. But the squash is like you pay for transport, so it's like $8 a tonne.
yeah, so
That's what you can be needing.
yeah, that's it. So if that's the market, then in a sense, not having access to the animal seed market has meant that the hemp industry has to get a little bit smarter about their waste streams and say, well, if we need to keep it more in the human waste, what are the products we can make? And then you start reading this Callahan document and it starts mentioning polyphenols and peptide this and all of these other things that could possibly be extracted out that sell for more than the raw material. So,
Even part of that after that extraction process thing, it's still waste.
Well, we would like to get a whole circular economy such that there is no waste. No waste as in, here's something that I have to pay to get rid of.
Yeah.
That would be, that would be wasteful resource of my dollar, as business use. But again, there's going to be somebody in the farming community that would say, hey, put that in a truck, I'll pay the transport. So there's no need for waste, but if we got smart about it, what could we do? And again, at scale, because there's tons and tons of kiwi fruit that doesn't quite meet the spec of an export market.
Yeah.
But there's not tons and tons of hemp in that same bulk.
But the nutritional value is thousands and hundreds of people out there hungry and malnourished.
So let's get it out to them.
Yeah, definitely. And teach them how to make
Cook.
cook.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Guys, it's just gone up to 6:10, so I'm going to say cheerio.
That's how late it is. It's 6:10 already.
Sorry.
It's a long time.
You haven't been here all night.
Morning.
So thank you very much for being here, the online people. Really appreciate that, and thank you all for attending as well. And I hope it was useful, and we can carry on the conversations, but I do want to just hit the stop button there. So thank you, everybody.